And there are two things that God says specifically you don't touch. You don't touch the prophets or do them any harm. But you don't touch the children, or like Jesus said, it'd be better that a millstone be tied around your neck than to touch the children.
Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be talking about don't touch the anointed. Don't harm the prophets. This comes from 1 Chronicles 16:22 and Psalm 105:15. I'm going to talk about those verses today and why we shouldn't touch the anointed and harm the prophets. To understand this, there is a parallel between 1 Chronicles 16 and Psalm 105. 15 to 16 verses in each one of those are almost identical, meaning it's the same psalm in both. And because 1 Chronicles gives us a story behind it, I'll start out with that. David had the Ark of the Covenant. You know, that ark that the movie was made out of with Harrison Ford. The Ark of the Covenant is brought into Jerusalem because another country had taken it in war, in a battle. And it was not in Israel for quite a while. But finally, that country decided they can't keep it because bad things were happening to the village that was holding that Ark of the Covenant and to their gods. So they sent it back to Israel. And Israel brought it back into the temple after a few problems, but brought it back into, not the temple, but the tabernacle, because the temple was not yet built. And the tabernacle was the same one that Moses had designed and created and had created. And so it was brought back in after it was placed in its proper place. David wrote a psalm and gave it to Asaph, who was the worship leader at that time, and his brothers. And so with that song, it goes through several subjects, but it ends with one subject in particular, and it has to do with the history of Israel. And only the beginning of the history is mentioned in the psalm. Up until we talk about don't touch the anointed and don't harm the prophets, in that historical part, in that context, he's not talking about prophets of the day. He's not talking about future prophets. He's talking about Abraham and Isaac. Now, this needs a little bit more explanation. Abraham left his country, left his father, and went to a land that God said he would show him, a promised land. And when he entered the promised land, what he saw was famine. What he saw were a lot of people inhabiting the place. And God says, I will give this all to you and to your descendants. And Abraham starts walking slowly towards Egypt. And when he enters Egypt, he tells his wife, listen, you are really a good-looking woman. Thank you, she says. He says, you're really good-looking. In fact, you're so good-looking that you create a problem for me. These Egyptians will kill me and take you. So in order to protect your husband, because this is the right thing to do back in that day, I want you to tell people you are my sister. So if They want you. They're going to take you. Now, what is not mentioned here is she could not have children. And in that day, not having children was a sign of not being a good wife. Was this at all in his thinking? I'm not going to say. I don't know. I'm not going to judge Abraham on this particular situation. All I know is I'm sure that's what she thought. That might have been running through her mind. Any way you want to put it. All right, so they enter in. He tells everybody she is my sister. And by the way, she was half-sister to Abraham. Pharaoh learns that there's this nice-looking woman who just entered Egypt. And she so happens to be somebody who's a lot better looking than most of the Egyptian women. And so he wants her. And he gives Abraham a lot of wealth, a lot of stuff. Abraham actually becomes very wealthy from this. But before long, there are plagues in Egypt. And it's revealed to Pharaoh that this is because the woman you have taken is Abraham's wife. So he calls Abraham, scolds him, and sends him out with more gifts. Little later on, Abraham goes into a city called Jour. For lack of my ability to know the right pronunciation, I'll say Jour. And when he enters that city, he says to his wife, "Tell them you're my sister." Same reason. Sure enough, the king of Jour sees this beautiful woman, and he says, "I want her." And so he gives Abraham a lot of things, a lot of wealth, and he takes her. But before he can have relations with her, he's warned in a dream, "You're a dead man." And he's afraid. He fears. What? This is the woman you took. She belongs to Abraham. But you go to Abraham and have him pray for you because he is a prophet. And so he goes to Abraham and he says, "What have you done? I might have slept with her and done a terrible thing." And Abraham says, "I thought you had no fear of God, so I passed her off as my sister. After all, we're half and half. She's half sister." Now what's going on here? He is considering, because he believes this guy has no fear of God, that he's going to be immoral and not care. He's just going to steal this woman from him and kill him. Now, after that, Abraham leaves. Years later, Abraham's son Isaac, he visits Jour. And on the way in, he turns to his wife and he says, "Tell them you're my sister." Sure enough, same thing happens. Only this king, he finds out in a different way. He's not warned by God in a dream. He's looking out through his window and he sees Isaac messing around with his wife. And whatever he's doing with his wife, the Bible makes it kind of, he's playing with her, he's goofing around with her, doing something fun. Whatever he was doing evidently revealed that they were married. So he was not too happy with it. Send them both out, send them both packing. Now, this is the context. This and this alone is the context that David says, "Don't touch the anointed, don't harm the prophets." It's something God warned Pharaoh. God warned the king of Jour, but God was protecting them, and that was as far as it went. I'm going to wrap it up today because that's the context, that's the scriptural context of what we are dealing with. But I'm going to get more into this because there's more to it than just that. Why are prophets using this verse? Really? Secondly, how should we deal with that? When somebody says, don't harm the prophets, don't speak out against them, that's forbidden in the Bible. How do we deal with it? So this is the scriptural part of it. And my conclusion is that it was dealing with Abraham and it was dealing with Isaac in the context of Israel's beginning. This is Ted. You have a good day.